Hello, and welcome to IK, or Interview Kickstart's talk on automation testing. My name is Roland, and we'll be covering testing with Selenium. Selenium is used to interact with web pages and programmatically test those values. I've included some of the more common web page elements below, and we'll be talking about locators in Selenium used to interact with these elements. For example, how might we ensure that a given href has the expected link text? How do we ensure that an image has loaded? How might we ensure that the web page is the intended web page we want to interact with? These are problems that Selenium aims to solve. I've included an example web page element below, and we might ask ourselves how we would locate it. What attributes will we use to target? Additionally, we might ask ourselves what happens when we use a bad locator if the element isn't visible, or it might be partially visible because another element is over it. Or maybe we haven't gotten to the expected web page yet, and we've started searching for that next element. These are problems we have to think about and address when we're designing test cases with Selenium. So again, looking at that example we had before, we see that we could use the href, the text, or the partial text to identify this element more reliably. If we use a bad locator, or we try to interact with an element that isn't present or visible yet, we receive an exception on those errors. So it is imperative that we wait for an element to be visible, either through implicit or explicit waits, or have some other solution in place for that. Now, I'm sure you've all reviewed the foundation material, but do you recall the different locators that Selenium has available? If not, don't worry, we'll be covering those briefly now. And I've included an example web page element that might be identified using those strategies. The first locator we're going to talk about is the ID locator. It is by far the most popular because the World Wide Web standard has specified that IDs should be unique across web pages. This means if you need to find a specific element and you know it has a unique ID, it makes finding this element trivial. Examples of this might include login forms. It might include password or username fields. It's a very common way for a developer to identify those web page elements. Additionally, the name locator is also a popular method. There is a caveat, though, because this attribute does not need to be unique. Multiple elements can share this name attribute. The first element found matching will be returned unless you're finding multiple elements or anything like that. The default behavior for the name locator is to return the first element found matching that locator. The text locator is also fairly common. It's used to validate links are on pages. It can be used to validate that intended changes have been made, and so on and so forth. What tends to happen, though, is because text and partial text can be shared across multiple elements, you will be finding more than one element, or rather the first element, depending on the strategy you're using. The XPath Locator is fairly advanced, as you don't need to actually know any of the attributes for that element you wish to interact with. You can use the XML style pathing to drill down that web page and find the element you want to interact with. The CSS Selector locator is very similar to XPath in that you can drill down to a specific element of a web page without having to use identifying attributes. However, this is going to be based on the CSS, not the HTML. One thing I would like to point out for both XPath and CSS is they are very brittle. Anytime you make changes to your web page, if you're interacting with a React web page or something like that, you might want to stick with the more traditional approaches of using ID or name as your strategy. And that's everything for our talk on testing with Selenium today. We will be going into detail with code examples in our next talk, and I hope to see you there.
Want to become a software engineer at Google? You can, like thousands of our students. You just need to learn from those who've already cleared FANG interviews. At Interview Kickstart, our interview prep courses are developed and taught live by 150+ instructors from Tier 1 companies like Google and Facebook. Our courses are tailored to help you crack software engineering domain interviews, including back-end, full-stack, machine learning, embedded systems, data science, and more. To learn more, book your free webinar slot today